Good morning and afternoon. Thank you for joining me for the Guilt While Caregiving webinar. Whether you're here live, I appreciate that you take the time to join me, or if you get the chance to watch this recording later, I appreciate you being here. I'd like to start by just welcoming you into this space. Some of us might have, I know I did, a little tech issues or creating the time for yourself while you're busy. So if you can just take a moment and shake out whatever stress that you have from the day, from finding the email, shake your arms, shake your shoulders. And then I invite you to slow down and we'll do some breathing together. So we'll do something called the box breathing, where you'll breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, hold at the top, hold your breath for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and leave your lungs empty. Just as a way to welcome us all into this space. I personally like to put a hand on my chest and one on my belly to feel my breath go in and out. If that feels comfortable to you, I invite you to do so. And for some people, they like to close their eyes as well. So starting with an exhale through the mouth, breathing in through our nose, holding at the top, exhaling through the mouth, allowing our lungs to be empty. And again, inhale, hold, exhale, leaving the lungs empty. 3 more rounds on your own. And when you're feeling ready, coming back. I always like to start with deep breathing as it gets us, our energies aligned, and also allows you to really become present here. It's one of the top techniques to use to reduce stress. And the nice thing is that we always carry our lungs with us. Guilt is perhaps the most painful companion of death. As a caregiver, you are a companion on someone's path toward their death. It is often a thankless job, but I want to thank you. You are so dedicated to your loved one. It's an important part of humanity, and it's a very difficult job you are doing. Unfortunately, our society does not care as much respect as it deserves. And so we are dependent on individuals like yourself to really step in and care for our loved ones. And I know a lot of you do it out of dedication and love. So thank you. My name's Daniela. I am a licensed practicing therapist. I have been working with elders for the last decade in a variety of capacities. First, I was working as an activities assistant at a independent living facility in which I got to work with individuals with different types of dementias and be with them during the day. And then I was there while I went to grad school and became a licensed therapist. The entire time I knew I wanted to work with caregivers, so really geared my studies towards that. Now I've been in private practice for the last 5 years, primarily working with caregivers. Nice to meet you. A quick agenda of what we will be talking today about. First, we'll start with the definition of guilt. Then we'll explore the difference between guilt and shame. We'll look into the different types of guilt. We'll do a self-compassion guided meditation. We'll discuss how guilt shows up in the body, how guilt shows up in the therapy room. And then I'll introduce you to my group program, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. I ask that you type in your questions along the way and or hold them towards the end, and I'd be happy to help you. Also, if you want to rename yourself so your name shows up in your box, there's three little dots on the right, and that would be great so that I can interact with you directly by name. Thank you for being here. So the reason that I chose guilt is because it's the most common expression besides grief that shows up with caregivers in the therapy room. It's very normal and it's okay to have these big feelings. It's often easier to feel guilt than the pain of sorrow. And that's because witnessing a loved one suffering is really hard. But often, guilt can feel like a ball and chain or a heaviness that you are carrying around. And my hope is through this discussion, you can start understanding that guilt and then inviting it to step back a little bit so that you can just be with the experience that you're having and show up with the full heart to being a caregiver. So we'll start with the definition of guilt. It's a feeling of worry or unhappiness that you have because you have done something wrong, such as causing harm to another person. That's according to the Cambridge Dictionary. Also, guilt combines both affective emotions and cognitive thoughts aspects. This includes negative self regard and an unpleasant or even painful feelings associated with the belief that we might have done something wrong or hurt someone. Guilt is a disguise for love. It shows how deeply you care. Often people put together guilt and shame, and there sometimes is a little bit of a confusion around the difference. So I'm here to share a little bit. Guilt is the feeling remorse or responsibility for something you've done wrong or perceived you've done wrong. It relates to a specific action like making a mistake, committing an offense, or hurting someone, whether that's intentionally or most of the time unintentionally. Guilt shows up as a way of judging oneself about one's personal beliefs of what is right and wrong and what one should be able to do. Whereas shame is a feeling that yourself is wrong or a part of you is bad, and it may not be related to a specific behavior or event, but more about who you are. Shame is the feeling that you are worthy of contempt or inadequate as a person, that I am a bad person. Shame is relating to our behavior or self in relation to other people's opinions or judgments of your character. There's multiple types of guilt. The first one I want to discuss is natural guilt. That's when you do something that was wrong. Your action has direct consequences. And this natural guilt motivates you to take an action in an effort to fix or ask for forgiveness. Natural guilt motivates you to make changes so you do not repeat the mistake again in the future. Some examples of natural guilt in caregivers is yelling at your loved one out of frustration. I haven't met a single caregiver who hasn't had that experience yet. Blaming your loved one for their disease, not remembering an appointment, forgetting to give them a medication, saying a hurtful thing because they won't remember anyways. This is very common, and this list is not exhaustive. So what do you do when natural guilt comes up? When you honestly can tell yourself, I've done something wrong, there is a way to be with that, to be with this emotion. So the first thing we do is we admit it. So for the sake of an example of yelling at a loved one, which many of us have done, I admit I was very frustrated and annoyed from repeating myself or the fact they weren't listening. So I yelled at them. So then we stop and assess the situation. Are they safe? Am I safe? Was I hungry at the time? Did I need to use the restroom? Was there too much stimulus going on? What else was happening that led me to that point of frustration that I can think about and make sure is not happening in the future? The next step is to apologize. And that apology is important both for yourself and also for the person that will be receiving the apology. And I know apologies are a bit tricky with those with dementia. After we apologize, there is the importance of atoning or making amends, fixing what went wrong so that both you and your loved one are in safety, and ideally learning so that it happens less frequently. The last thing is to accept forgiveness from yourself or from others and allow this guilty feeling to pass through you like a wave. As mentioned, dementia and apologizing can feel a bit tricky. It reminds me of when I worked at this activity center, an individual had come in who I worked with daily, and she was really upset. She has dementia and she was really upset. She said, my daughter yelled at me. I don't know what's wrong. My daughter yelled at me. So her and I went to a room and we practiced some calming techniques and tried to really bring her back down before we went back and joined the program. And still throughout the day, she kept saying, my daughter yelled at me. I don't know what happened. And so that was a lightning bolt moment for me, understanding that, oh, our caregivers need more support and understanding of how to navigate this really difficult role. And the fact that she couldn't remember why her daughter was mad at her, but she could remember that feeling. So that brings me to the point of apologizing. The individual may not remember the apology or the reason you were mad, but they may remember that feeling. So if you do have the opportunity to go and apologize, they'll remember the fact that there was this softer interaction that got to happen again. The second type of guilt is maladaptive guilt, and that's feeling guilty for things that are not in your control. Often it's a strong sense of regret or shame. This type of guilt is usually unjustifiable. Maladaptive guilt is also called unhealthy guilt and can have long-lasting and serious implications on one's mental health. Some examples of maladaptive guilt from caregivers is, I should have known my loved one was going to react that way. I shouldn't have gone out with my friend that one time when something bad happened. My loved one is in a community supporting housing versus at home. I did not take them to the doctor sooner, which could have caught the disease and things could have been different. Another example of guilt is that my family thinks caregiving or major decisions should be done a certain way, but they do not understand all the details. I have a sense of relief about a recent change in health or a decrease in my duties. I feel guilty about needing to talk to others about what is happening or needing to take a break. It's so natural that you need to talk about what's happening. And that is why I became a therapist, to give space for you caregivers to process the really big experience that you're having. It's not just your loved one, but it is also impacting you. Again, this is a short list. There's many others, but I'm sure some of you can relate to some of these. So a way to counteract maladaptive guilt is through the supportive caregivers thought record that I created. A thought record is a common tool used in therapy where we're really trying to break apart the situation from the thought and the feeling. And the importance of doing that is to really slow down our thought process, be present, and to make sure that thought and the feeling we're having actually matches the facts of our actions or inactions. So I'm going to walk through this example here. The example I chose is that my loved one needs professional help. Most of the time while caregiving, there comes a time where you need to bring in more help for your loved ones. So the thought is, I should be helping more. That's what a good family member does. The feeling that may invoke is, I feel guilty that I am not being a good caregiver. So then we stop and we look for the evidence to support that thought or to negate that thought. So the evidence that supports that thought of I'm not being a good caregiver or I'm feeling guilty is that my loved one's needs are not getting met. The evidence that negates that thought is, this week I've already completed 10 tasks towards my loved one's care. I'm still dedicated to their well-being. I am taking time to hire the right people. I am joining them for doctor's appointments. And the truth is, I can only give so much without causing harm to my own health. So once you sit with that evidence, you want to create an alternative thought. Caregiving has so many moving parts, and I continue to try my hardest. Most people cannot care for a loved one alone. Asking and receiving help is to be expected. And then we assess what's the outcome or the new feeling we have now that we've created this alternative thought. I feel more willing to receive professional help. I recognize how much I am giving to my loved one, and I do it out of love. So this is an example of the importance of really slowing down our thought process and seeing if those thoughts are true, or if we can reframe them in a way that actually supports us in this really challenging role as a caregiver. I will be sharing this thought record with you in the replay email that will be going out later today or tomorrow, and it will live on my website for anyone and anyone. And then the last type of guilt is, actually, I'm going to take a sip of water, is existential guilt. And it's complicated and often centered on things like guilt over injustices or guilt about not living according to one's principles. One specific type of existential guilt is survivor's guilt, often seen with caregivers. It's having a guilty complex because you are doing well when others you care about are not. It often emerges when someone survives some type of accident or disaster in which others are harmed. But it can also occur when other people experience misfortune when you don't. So as a caregiver, we're constantly watching someone suffer, and we may be doing a bit better, and so there rises some guilt. Some examples of this some examples of this existential guilt from caregivers are the following. It should have been me who got sick. I shouldn't have fun if my loved one cannot. The medical system is failing us. I am working, prioritizing my kids, and not doing more for my loved one. I need to place them in a different housing option when I promised them I wouldn't. I feel guilty about even feeling guilty. I feel guilty because they are dying. This is so hard. And we have a lot of resources. I have access to good medical care. I cannot even imagine those who don't. So a way to counteract this type of guilt is through some self-compassion. Self-compassion is one of the top exercises that us as caregivers and as humans, we need to walk our path gently. So I want to invite you to join me for a moment of self-compassion. So take a moment to get comfortable in your seat as you adjust your body. Notice any physical sensations you are experiencing. Notice where your body touches the chair, where your feet touch the floor. Close your eyes if that feels comfortable to you as you continue to tune into your body. Notice your breath as it enters and leaves the body. Where is this sensation most obvious to you? Do you feel your breath in your nostrils? In your chest rising and falling? Take some time to notice your breath. Our bodies are our homes. With the next few breaths, recognize how tough it is to be a caregiver. First, simply acknowledge that this is a difficult situation. You are being pulled in many different directions, trying to balance a variety of needs. It is physically, emotionally, and mentally exhausting. This is hard, and there are moments of witnessing others suffering. There are moments of your own suffering. You may feel scared, exhausted, or stressed out. Recognize it in the body and take another deep breath. These emotions are like waves. They come and go continuously. Difficulty is a part of our experience, and like everything else, it too will shift. It is natural to suffer. It is a part of living. Recognize that others also feel this way to different degrees and expressions, but we all do. We all feel this multiple times throughout our lifetime. Repeat to yourself after me, I know that I am not alone. May I be kind to myself, even in moments of difficulty. May I remember that my needs are as important as my loved ones. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I continue to love myself so I can show up as a loving caregiver. May I forgive myself for being human and making mistakes. May I be patient and strong. Take a few deep breaths, letting go of the practice, and notice how your body feels now. Allowing any sensations to be just as they are. Allowing yourself to be just as you are in this moment of self-compassion and kindness. When you're feeling ready, join me again. So, what exactly is self-compassion? Self-compassion entails being warm and understanding towards ourselves when we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate. Rather than ignoring our pain or flagellating ourselves with self-criticism. There's 3 components to self-compassion. Not listed is being hydrated. The first one is self-kindness, is being aware how you talk to yourself, about yourself. Are you being critical or judgmental? Are you being your own best cheerleader? The second is the common humanity, that we are all humans trying to walk this path of being caring in a difficult time, that we all make mistakes, we're all flossom. The third is mindfulness. It's the ability to slow down, to come into awareness, to be with yourself in the situation. So the reason that we talk about self-compassion is because the research shows and how important it is. And unfortunately, just recently, a study came out saying that 75% of people who find it easy to be supportive of others score very low on self compassion tests and are not very nice to themselves. And I want to invite you to be as nice to yourself as you can, because caregiving is already hard enough. That if adding any more difficulty is not going to help you last the full length of the journey. Some studies have shown that self compassion has been shown to be useful for people with high levels of self criticism and self judgment. These two variables that may be part of the phenomenon of feeling guilty. Also, self compassion have been associated with better psychological health, including depression and anxiety. Unfortunately, depression and anxiety is really high amongst caregivers. It's higher than the general population. And that is why I'm here today to invite you to think about ways to support yourself so that you can remain as healthy as you can while you are on this caregiving path. So we want to explore how guilt shows up. What are the symptoms of guilt? How do I know that I'm feeling guilty? So the psychological symptoms are the following. You're experiencing reoccurring obsessive thoughts. You may be feeling some of these things, not all of them. Reoccurring obsessive thoughts, anxiety, sadness, and low self-esteem. For some people, it leads to suicidal ideation. For others, it's being extremely sensitive to the effects of any action or avoiding any full range of emotion at all. Often people feel overwhelmed by making a wrong decision or making a decision at all. For many, guilt shows up as a way to self-punish, or they may self-sabotage their behavior. Often people feel undeserving. A common thing for caregivers, of course, is putting others before oneself. And for some extreme cases, there's flashbacks of traumatic events. Guilt also shows up in our body. The ways it shows up in the body is through appetite changes, difficulty sleeping, headaches, nausea, or racing heart. For those of us who study the connection between mind and body, there's a belief that our body is constantly giving us messages. So if we slow down to recognize, why am I having a headache? Why am I having a racing heart? Why is there a knot in my stomach? And become curious with our body of, what is this message? What are you trying to tell me? Maybe it will realign you with your values or let you know that something needs to change. That, of course, is something that we have to practice. There's also studies about how guilt shows up in the brain, and it shows up in both the amygdala and the frontal lobes. The amygdala is in the back of the brain. It's one of the oldest parts of the brain, and that is where we process fear and a threatening stimuli. So you think of that fight, flight, or freeze response, and really is what keeps you safe in immediate threats. And then it also shows up in the frontal lobe, where we have voluntary movement, expressive language, and higher level executive functioning, including planning, organizing, and self-monitoring. So of course, with guilt, we have to be able to plan in the future how to do something different or monitor ourselves. I know that sounds like a lot of symptoms and concern, but also guilt's not all that bad. Guilt is adaptive. As I just said, with the flight or flight, it keeps us safe. Guilt shows that you care about other people and the impact of your actions. It's a trait of consciousness. Allows you to think about what's right versus wrong, which also makes you a nice person to be in relationship with. That's why you have friends and community. Guilt's a guide to avoid doing what is wrong. Guilt helps you make decisions that keep you and your loved ones safe. And guilt demonstrates when our actions are misaligned with our values, and it invites us to slow down and think about how we want to act moving forward. I know I've already listed a bunch of common experiences with caregivers and guilt, but truthfully, it's so common, there's even more. And part of the reason why I want to keep listing them is so that you know that you're not alone. These feelings are okay and they're common, and there's a community here who's here to support you. So, other examples of how guilt shows up for caregivers is not knowing how to react to a loved one's behavior. Sometimes people feel guilt from doing self care. For example, is that they feel guilty that their loved one has to stay at home when they go out, or that their loved one has to be with someone else when they go out. Yet it's so important for the caregiver to have some breaks. So that way you're able to be on the path for a long time without burnout. Some people have guilt about having negative emotions, that he is the one in pain. I shouldn't feel bad. Or if I loved him as much as I said I do, I would be able to handle it more. But caregiving is difficult. So it's natural to have these emotions. And again, if we can just make space for them so we can feel them and allow them to be like waves, they can not show up in our interaction with others. Sometimes guilt comes over neglecting other parts of life. I should be working more. I should be paying more attention to other relationships. I should be prioritizing my health and cooking and doing hobbies. And there's just a lot of things to balance as a caregiver. And often you're living two people's lives. You're taking care of yourself, and you're constantly thinking about what this other person needs as well, and doing both roles. Guilt can show up as a way to handle it by yourself. There's a belief you should handle it by yourself. That if I loved him enough, there is that I should be able to do it alone. Or there's a sense of I owe you. It's like they were a good partner to me earlier in life, or they were an excellent parent to me, so I should be able to handle it, which it's hard when we shit on ourselves. Another experience of common guilt is from the care recipients' comments. These individuals who are dealing with the disease themselves are sad and angry and scared. And so they say things like, I have no one else, or when you leave, I'm lonely. And it can bring in different types of guilt. And then lastly, some complaints and comments about the caregiver from other community members who believe they know what's best for your loved one or have a lot of opinions, yet sometimes they don't hold all the information. Most of the time they don't. And for many people who haven't walked this caregiving path, they just don't understand how difficult and consuming it can be. And so that's why joining a support group can be really helpful, so that you can be with others who understand the demands and the emotions of being a caregiver. So we've talked about a few things to do. We have the thought exercise, we have the stopping and assessing, and also some self-compassion. But sometimes you don't have time to go write or be with the self-compassion in the moment. So there's things you can do just as guilt arises. The first thing is to name it. The whole saying goes, you name it to tame it. And then you can meet it with curiosity. Does my feelings of guilt fit the facts? Am I doing something wrong? Am I causing harm? Is this lining up with my values? Am I feeling guilty because of unrealistic expectations? Is guilt showing up instead of grief? Where in my body am I feeling this guilt? And if I meet that with curiosity, turn to this part of you that's feeling guilty and ask it, what do you want me to know? Do I need to make a change? Are you wanting to remind me that it's okay to feel sad? As examples. There's your grief or anger or whatever you're dealing with, and then there's your judgment about it, which is the real culprit. So as a therapist, this is something I see often, that people are having these secondary emotions such as guilt that they're seeing the lens of their experience through, when often the grief or the anger is what's underneath it. So as a therapist, I see guilt show up in caregivers for the following reasons. Guilt shows up as a form of fear about what is going to happen in a disease prognosis. Guilt shows up as an expression of a fear of death. Guilt shows up as a protection layer from feeling sorrow or pain. Guilt is often used as an effort to stay attached to the person. Guilt prevents you from letting go of control or letting go of the ideas of how you thought life was going to be. Guilt is a misplaced way to safeguard your loved one. And oftentimes, people are overly critical of themselves, which can lead to distorted idea of what happened or disproportionate level of guilt. Guilt is a way to get some attention or acknowledgement, as often the community is so focused on the individual who is sick that there's not enough attention for the caregiver. And that is why I want to invite you to find a space that is for you as a caregiver, where your needs and concerns get to be voiced and you get to be prioritized, even just for an hour a week. One of the main things that I work with caregivers in a therapy setting is the relationship to expectations. Often as a caregiver, you are balancing your own expectations of how to be a good spouse, child, family member, friend, employee, survivor of a pandemic, etc. But not only are you dealing with your own expectations, but you're dealing with your loved ones' expectations of how they think you should be able to show up, what they expect you to do as a caregiver. You may also be dealing with your family members' expectations of how things should be done, or their expectations of how much capacity you have, as well as society's pressures to care for your loved one. Unfortunately, in the Western world, we don't have enough support systems, so a lot of it falls on us as individuals versus having a community. So it's really important to update our expectations to match our current reality. There's a chance that you had this idea of what caregiving was going to be when you first got that diagnosis, but here we are 6 months, 2 years, 10 years in, and things are different. Your capacity is different, what their needs are different. And so I invite you to think about your expectations frequently and meet them with curiosity. Do these expectations belong to me? Do I agree with these expectations? Where did these expectations even come from? Are my expectations too vague? Are they attainable? Am I leaving too much room for non-clear interpretations, than setting this goal that is unclear and judging myself for not getting to a place where I don't really know what it is? This is some of the work that I get to do with individuals. So that is my presentation. And the reason why I'm so invested in working with caregivers is my grandmother, Frances, and my mother, Florence, who both worked with the elderly in their careers. This is a picture of me and my granny. She was about 12 years into dementia at the time. And we are making something called the chocolate roll, which is an ice cream cake. It's basically a chocolate cake that you roll ice cream into. It's delicious. And they're really the reason why that I have chosen to be in this line of work. Also, the silver tsunami is coming our way. I don't know if you've heard of this metaphor, but it's used to describe the aging population. Many of you know, but today 15% of Americans are 65 or older, and that number is expected to balloon to over 20% by 2050. In the US, that will bring an estimated 40 million additional people relying on Medicare, using the healthcare system, and seeking caregiver support. Now, it's great in many ways that a lot of our culture is getting more ready for this, and we are seeing more education about how to care for a loved one, about how to get your legal paperwork together, about how to hire caregivers, and a lot of the really practical parts of caregiving. But what I've recognized is that there's not a lot around the emotional needs of caregivers. And truthfully, it's such an important part of the experience of caregiving is this real close brush with mortality, and your own emotional experiences are important. So, and I believe that if you take time to be with those and space to be with that emotional experience, that it really can be an opportunity for personal growth. And that is why I have created the Calm, Compassionate, Connected Caregiver program that I will be starting this fall. And it is a 6-week program that is somewhat similar to what we did today, but a small cohort of individuals coming together to really discuss the emotional impacts of caregiving while getting specific tools to use and creating a community of support. So we'll discuss topics such as sorrow and love, anger and joy, fear and acceptance, and grief and closure. And the program looks like the following. There will be a once a week 2-hour session where this will be a version of educating and talking about these topics and getting specific tools to use. And then there will be an optional 1-hour traditional support group so that the cohort family can really support each other in some of the day-to-day practicality stuff of the caregiving experience, and you can share about your loved ones. As well as there'll be a time in which I spend an hour answering any personal questions that come. So that is coming this fall, and if you are interested, I hope you will join me. And there's a couple other ways to work with me. As I am a licensed therapist, I work with individuals and traditional therapy, virtual therapy, in the states of Florida and Oregon. I also do adult group family consulting, and that is often with a couple of adult children or adult children and one of their parents as they discuss their loved one's needs and balancing that task of caregiving. Often we talk about some of the big decisions that are coming up, taking a driver's license, when to move someone. We talk about who can do what role. We talk about how to communicate with each other as a family because everyone is grieving the experience of witnessing their loved one. And then I also offer individual consulting for anyone, anywhere. Quickly, I'd like to just say thank you to the scientists and the writers out there who I pulled information from for this guild presentation. They are listed here. And then that is it for now. I am happy to answer any questions you may have. And I know a few of you were able to write in the chat, and my friend Hannah will help me answer questions, or if you want to speak them individually, please raise your hand.
Hi. Well, I can read the questions in the chat while we get started. So one person wanted to know if you can send out the slide deck that you used today.
Yes, I'd be happy to send over the slide deck for those who are interested.
Great, thank you. And then Pam has a comment and question. So she says, how to deal with anger, sadness, and resentment. This is from childhood and current comments that are hurtful. And Pam, feel free to unmute yourself to elaborate if you'd like.
I'm happy to jump in on that question. Thank you for asking that, Pam. Yes, it is really difficult. The truth is that these are complicated relationships. We hope for really clear and easy relationships, but the longer you are in a relationship, the less chance that that is the case. And fear and sadness and resentment really do show up frequently. And so, how do we deal with that? Is we deal with it within ourselves. We turn and we negotiate that relationship with that fear, with that resentment. We get to know it, try to understand what it is guiding us to think about, guiding us to do. It's something that I get to work on in individual therapy with people. And as you saw on my list, I will be concentrating on fear and sorrow as two of the main topics. But really, it's practicing that self-compassion and giving yourself permission to take breaks. If they say something that is driving you nuts, you can go to the bathroom and throw your fist in the air and let your frustration out and splash some water on your face and try to go again. But often we don't want to react in the with them, because that will just spiral things up. There are some specific regulation skills that you would be learning in my program, and really finding someone to do individual therapy with would be helpful to negotiate your own feelings and with this sense of resentment, and then to get to understand it, and mostly to let go of it for your well-being, and not necessarily expecting forgiveness from the other person or trying to forget what happened, but really how can you change the relationship with these painful moments so that it's not the lens in which you are looking at your lived experience through.
Thank you so much. This has answered my questions. This has been great. I love this. I work on this stuff, and I'm looking forward to your program. And it does answer my questions. And um, I deal with both of my parents. My dad's almost 90, my mom's 87, and I help them. And it's just, I like you framing it up that it's my own personal growth, and so that I can love this, and I do, and it can be so hard. It can be so hard.
It is so hard. That is right. And that's important to name it in the moment. This is so hard, and yet I'm still showing up.
Yeah.
I deserve to be kind to myself because this is so hard. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Amy has a question in the chat. She wants to know, can you please give an example of what atoning might look like after apologizing?
Yeah. I mean, that looks different for each person. Some people may have a religious context to it. Some people may not. But to atone may be, to me, it's what can I do to release? What can I do to forgive myself? What can I do to learn so that I don't repeat again? Yeah. Thank you for asking. Any other questions?
I have a question. I was wondering if you could tell us what kind of caregiver is appropriate for the program you're planning this year.
Thank you. Yeah. It is appropriate for multiple types of caregivers. It can be appropriate for individuals who live with the person that they are caring for, and also can be appropriate for individuals who live across the world and are doing distance caregiving. Really, it's appropriate for people who are wanting to work on their own emotional well-being and are open to exploring their the opportunity for growth during this really, really challenging situation, and for individuals who want to have a cohort of others who are there to do the same thing. Also, it will need to be someone who's willing and has the capacity to commit that time to weekly. I know that is not accessible to all caregivers. I see one other a question in the chat.
Oh, yes, I can read that for you.
Thank you.
So Karen wants to know, do you know what day and time your program will be yet and the cost?
I have not zeroed in on my final dates yet. That's why I am saying the fall. It most likely will be October, November. And the cost is $995 for the 6-week program. And I have a wait list open on my supportive caregiver website. And so if you would like to join the wait list, then I would contact you first once I have those dates finalized, and we would have an individual meeting to make sure that you're a good fit, and then we get going. And thank you for asking for the slide deck. Yes, I'm happy to send that out as well. If there's any other questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with me and to explore these feelings of guilt. It's not an easy topic, and it's very common. And I saw another question come up about driver's license removal. Pam, that's a great question that I'm happy to answer offline, and also something that would be appropriate for the group program for that like 1 hour me sharing. But it is true. It is something that brings up a lot of guilt of having to take the license away, and is one of the hardest experiences to give that freedom up. One thing to note about that is that in many states, you can ask the doctors to write a note for the individual to have to get retested around their driver's license, or I know in the state of Oregon, you can write an anonymous email or letter, excuse me, can be an email, to the DMV saying that you're not sure about this person's ability to drive. And so that would trick them into catching them into the system in theory. Yeah. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. It was an honor to spend this hour with you, and I hope that our paths cross again. Take care.